Howdy ho, everyone. Well, I'm going to start off this morning with a video about global warming. I know that that'll rattle a few cages, I'm sure, but it shouldn't, really. But the argument about global warming seems to reach a fervid pace, and people want to argue against each other rather than argue the evidence. And I've kept my mouth more or less shut on the issue because, I've made a couple videos where I've mentioned this in the past, but I generally don't make it a point to vocalize it as important as it really is to me, because for two reasons. One, that people are uneducated on the subject, and that I am uneducated on the subject, and that I have to educate myself as much as possible before I can actually, postulate a response. And after researching all the evidence for and against global warming, I see that much of it is very difficult to understand. Much of the data is incomplete and hard to comprehend unless you understand one part and the other part and another part. So you can piece these together and say, oh, okay, well, this is from this. Anyway, the average person who's not a climatologist, who doesn't research these things, it's easy to fall in line with people who are telling you, well, there's no man-made global warming. We're not causing the atmosphere to warm. Of course not. No, business as usual. Just keep burning fossil fuels. No big deal. And it's almost become like cliche to even talk about it, where if you mention that fossil fuels cause global warming, people are quick to jump down your throat and say, "Oh, that's ridiculous. Methane emissions are more, and that we don't know if this is a normal cycle." I've heard people say all the planets are warming up. That the sun is changing. It's the sun. But no, I've looked into it. The sun is not changing. In fact, it's on a minimum right now when it would have been on a maximum before this. We've had a lot of low solar activity, and the belief is that the solar, activity is what charges our atmosphere, rather charges the Earth's magnetic field. And all of this is a very, very complicated system that we don't all understand, and even a climatologist may not understand anything about the sun. So here you've got a guy who understands the climate, CO2, methane, all these emissions, but they don't understand how the sun relates to this. I'm not saying that they should. I'm just saying you, at that point, have to talk to someone who understands that concept and say, well, what's the sun doing? And they say, well, what are the cows doing? Here are the facts, because I've read so much about this, and so many of the arguments that go against global warming say things like, well, we've been thinking we were affecting the climate for a long time, even with aerosols. But there's really no evidence to support it. Another argument says that global warming's happening and CO2 emissions are to blame, partly, but it's not such a big deal because the temperature isn't rising as much as we thought. And they said, oh, but by the year 2100, it might only go up a few degrees. What they're saying is that increase in CO2 increases the clouds, but not the temperature. Now look, people, the ice caps are melting, okay? This isn't just some speculation. You can go look at the evidence that the ice caps are melting exponentially. I had an argument with somebody a while back about Antarctica, and they said, no, if you look at the evidence, actually the sea ice is growing. It actually is bigger this year. And I found out that there's there's pack ice and then there's surface ice. The surface ice is less than a meter thick, and it ebbs and flows with the seasons, whereas the pack ice is dropping 30 fucking meters. No, the ice is melting. The oceans are raising. This is obvious. I think it's the Maldives, where they're going to be underwater pretty soon, the next decade. I think they actually are the ones who did an underwater signing for the global treaty, where they all recently put on scuba suits and went down and signed the treaty underwater to make a point. But here's the rest of the world, suffering because of rising sea levels and problems with the climate. And then there's the big industrial nations who are saying, oh, well, what do you do? Sorry, we have cars, there's nothing we can do. So it's either we start looking at what we're doing and we say, okay, we are affecting the climate. We need to drive less. We need to get more onto green energy and change our power. Well, big coal, big oil, the automotive industry, all these people are very adamant about keeping things the way they are because that's business as usual. They don't want to have to retool and change the way that they think. So what they do is they make people who believe in global warming look stupid by putting out things like, how could a human do this, and how could a human cause that? And basically, these corporate entities, they create these stories about how global warming is nothing more than the green industry trying to pull a conspiracy over so they can make money off of green power, like wind power and solar power, as if there's really a green movement that is all-inclusive and owned by one company. But we know that's not true. The green movement, it encompasses thousands of companies, but millions, billions of people who just want a better way of life for the future for them and their kids. But along come these monsters who say, oh, you guys are just idiots. You're just trying to make money. You're just trying to, get people off of coal so you can make money. It's like the gas and coal industry is a major entity and a major player. When people talk about conspiracies and cover-ups and whatnot, I don't see how they can not see the most obvious one, which is the biggest moneymaker, fuels. The things that we've done to our climate and to our environment are just unacceptable. And that we've done it in the past, well, we thought that we were doing it right. We didn't realize that, when we discovered coal and oil, this wonderful stuff that burns and helps us drive cars, we didn't know that we were going to start taking it all out of the ground and causing all these problems. We didn't understand CO2 emissions at the time. So rather than say, oh, well, business as usual, look back and realize it's not our fault that we didn't know. But now that we know, what are we going to do about it? I've heard some very, very intelligent arguments on both sides. So the people who are supporters of global warming, who believe it, are not dumb, and people who are against it are not dumb either. It's not that people are just ignorant, but they're giving the best information that they can, and they're utilizing the best information they can. I wasn't even going to cover any of this type of the evidence, because it's really not. I was reading this page. It was the skepticalscience.com, and they were talking about the change in the Earth's total heat. Now, of course, this is, these are my point for showing this is these graphs can be misleading. This starts in 1960 though and goes to 2010. Now, if you look at a longer graph, you might see more ebbs and flows, and charts would, have more of a variation. This is the argument people use against it, that by saying that, oh, you're just using one part of a, of a study. Well, where did that thing go? This was pretty interesting. There was a little, besides that chart, this is the atmospheric total CO2 emissions from the year 1000 till the year 2000. And the chart on the bottom is when we started using, the total amount of CO2 emitted by humans, and the upper one is the atmospheric CO2, which remained consistent over the last 1,000 years until till the 1800s. If we're just going to sit here and deny that it's actually happening, we're just going to, our kids are going to look back, and they're going to shake their heads at us. I want to know that I, at least spoke out on the issue, that I'm at least making my voice heard in this world. I'm not saying I have all the evidence or I'm armed with all the info. Very well, in 50 years, maybe the Earth will turn around. Maybe there's a system where the Earth can heal itself, But the things we have to realize is that the more that the polar caps melt, the more they dilute the oceans. When they dilute the oceans, they will stop the conveyor. They call the, basically all the way up the Bermuda and all the way up through the East Coast. They have the, can't remember the name of it, it's the conveyor belt, basically. It's an underwater, as the salt goes up north, the salt water goes north, the salt sinks and it pulls the water back. It's a conveyor belt. As the water dilutes from the melting of the ice caps, that conveyor slows down and stops. This stops world currents. This creates more storms and more havoc. We're seeing this happen. It's happening right now. It's not even a speculation anymore. And up north, this is the one argument is that, and this is the one that I thought that blew me away when I found out that methane emissions are actually they say that it might contribute more to greenhouse effect than a CO2. So they're saying that cows, raising cows in mass like we do, is more harmful to the environment than all the cars we're driving. I had a hard time believing this one, so I had to do a little bit more research. And it is true, they put out a lot, but this is the spectrum of greenhouse radiation. And the higher one over here is the CO2 and how it affects. There's no point in showing it, you can't read it, but it shows the different wavelengths. The greenhouse effect from water vapor is filtered out, showing contributions of other greenhouse gases. Among the spikes you can see is energy being radiated back to Earth by ozone, methane, and nitrous oxide. But the spike for CO2 on the left dwarfs all other greenhouse gases and tells us something very important. Most of the energy being trapped in the atmosphere corresponds exactly to the wavelength captured by CO2. And when we're talking about spectrometers here, we're talking about spectroscopy or whatever, where you're analyzing the Earth's atmosphere and analyzing the compounds. You're analyzing the light leaving, the light entering, the different gases in the atmosphere, chromatography, and we know how things are spiking. We understand what's going on here. 10 years ago there was a debate about global warming. Today, I don't even know how people can debate it anymore, except for that they still want to believe and sit in their tunnel vision and think it's not important. But really, this is my biggest point. I think that people think it's just too overwhelmingly big to deal with. If we were to really think that every time we drive our car we're damaging the environment, I mean, we could, just by breathing we're releasing CO2. But it's not just it's not just driving, it's not just cars, automobiles, cows. It's the fact that we're deforesting, the fact that we are destroying the environment that filters the CO2 and releases new oxygen, and we're also stripping the forests off the hillsides, which causes the rivers to flow muddy and kills off the fish, and all the animals can die off. But the most important thing is that we remember that the atmosphere is our home, it's our blanket. And I know that it's overwhelming, I know it's complicated, sure as hell is for me. I try to drive as little as I can and all this, but I know it's very small. My impact is nothing compared to the factory down the street spewing out tons of carbon dioxide waste. So the issue really isn't automobiles so much as just business as usual. And one of the biggest complex thing that I didn't mention was that once the oceans do warm, because of the CO2 and the ice caps do melt, well, the problem compounds because we have millions of tons of methane trapped in frozen deposits under the seabed. When the seas warm up, that methane warms and releases into the atmosphere. This is how they believe that there may be big methane bursts. It's one of the theories for the Bermuda Triangle. Places like that where big methane bursts come out of the seabed or some sort of a gas. These are already being shown to be released. They've shown the videos of these areas where these methane deposits are, and they're already starting to bubble up, and it just compounds the problem. It's a runaway greenhouse. I know a lot of people just say, oh well, we're going to do what we're going to do, and that's life. But I guess, what do you do? Really, what do you do? You speak out. You speak out so a person can be informed, and the kids growing up today can make a decision with their lives. There may be a 16-year-old out there right now who's trying to figure out what he wants to do with his life, and he could either go into big oil or he could go into renewable energy. And by being armed with the information and the values of renewables, then he might make the right decision to go into that industry, and we need more brains in those industries. And so hopefully the next generation will pick up the slack, and we'll see. I know a lot of people are just sitting there rolling their eyes, probably thinking, oh God, global warming is just a man-made hoax. But you know what? That's total bullshit. We got to stop thinking that way. I stand strongly by the fact that, with all the evidence I've researched, the hours and hours of stuff that I've seen and read and heard about and looked at and studies, global warming is very real, and it's affecting our climate right now. And you can call it climate change, call it global warming, call it what you want. The reason why this is important is, somebody said the other day that When we were talking about presidents, and they said, why would you even, they said Sanders is a chump. He doesn't care. Bernie Sanders all he's worried about is global warming. He thinks global warming is more important than ISIS. And I thought about this ISIS, this little group of ragtag, thugs that'll be gone in a decade. Global warming's not going anywhere. It is a more important issue, but it's hidden. It's an issue you can't see. It's not in your face yet. But the more hurricanes and the more storms, the more problems that we have, and we're going to start to realize, and hopefully it's not too late, if there's anything we can do at all. But while people are out there screaming conspiracy and saying that the Illuminati is doing this and that the New World Order is doing that, focus your energy a little bit on the factory down the street that's spewing pollution into your rivers, into your streams. Talk to the leaders in your actual community that are making these decisions and allowing things to happen. And yeah, that's how I feel. So, talk to you later.